At the height of the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin envisioned a new form of warfare where battle lines were not necessarily limited to the battleground. Where is the prince, he asked, who can afford to defend his country from 10,000 men descending from the clouds? But Franklin's sky soldiers had to wait for the advent of the airplane and the parachute. Today, another generation of warriors trains to take the ultimate step, expand the battlefield of the infantryman into the third dimension, and become, in a word, airborne.
All right, Airborne, determine your direction and drift, and pull a two-riser slip into the opposite direction and drift. Keep your feet and knees together. Keep your feet and knees together. Your head nods are on the horizon. You're looking good, Airborne. You're looking good.
Motivation, aggressiveness, discipline, and the fortitude to never say die. That's what it takes to be an airborne soldier.
Ain't that a bitch?
Being airborne is an honor, and it's not a right. You have to earn it. And if you can't earn it, then you don't need to be here. There's 1,000 legs out there in the world, but there's only very few parachuters. The United States Army Airborne School is probably one of the best schools the Army has to offer. It's a very demanding challenge to pass this course.
Hey, hey, G.I. Joe. Hey, G.I. Joe. We off the wall, we ready to go. We're off the wall, we're ready to go. We're standing tall, we're looking good. We're standing tall, we're looking good. We ought to be in Hollywood. We ought to be in Hollywood.
The training we give them here is not for their mind, it's for their body, because when you jump out of an aircraft, your mind isn't in control of you, your body is.
All right, bend down, bend down. Now clear the platform. Clear the leg.
Everyone here is a volunteer. Officers and enlisted alike are put through a rigorous 3-week training program, starting with learning what to do when you hit the ground.
They need to absorb the training that we do give them. They need to be able to do things automatically. Your body needs to know how to react to certain things.
Prepare to drag. Drag. Pull it. Pull the jumper. Pull it.
In the second week, soldiers learn the correct way to exit a plane by jumping from a mock aircraft door.
Get your feet together so you're going to walk out normal. Just walk normal.
Hook him up, hook him up, hook him up. Let's go.
Here at the 34th Battalion, we're teaching people how to exit the aircraft and control their body from the time they exit the aircraft, to keep a good tight body position, and to control their descent while they're descending. Here you need courage, strength, and training, discipline. If you don't have that, you're not going to make it to the airborne school.
Attention to detail breeds confidence in the equipment. The better they know the equipment and the better trained they are, even the most minute things can cause them their lives.
Yet the life of a paratrooper doesn't rest solely on his keen skills to react well in combat situations, but also on the guarantee that his parachute will open. That responsibility rests in the hands of the parachute rigger.
There's no rooms for mistakes, no matter how small, in this field, because these are life support systems. A person's life depends upon this. It could be yours, it could be mine, someone I don't even know. This is my job, to save lives. That's what a parachute rigger does. Packing 25 a day, 30 a day, whatever. That's 25 and 30 lives, human lives. It's not just material, it's the man and the woman behind it. You have to have specific scores on your Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery in order to be intelligent enough to be a parachute rigger. Because you have to be a logistician, a mathematician, and a comedian all at the same time. Part-time philosopher, just to keep sane. Now, it may look like we're manhandling this parachute, but in actuality, once you get that radial seam fall together to form the air channel, you can kick this parachute around and the air channel's still going to be there. This chute will open. I'll jump it myself. I'll jump any chute I pack or any of my fellow riggers pack. Hey, Air Force gets you up, but we get you down on the ground safely.
The moment of truth is now upon these soldiers as they complete their final week of airborne training. During the course of this week, they'll make 5 jumps from 1,250 feet. 10% won't make the grade.
Fired up, fired up, fired up, Sergeant Airborne.
I think the reality of the whole situation hits everyone at different times. Some people were starting to feel it walking on the aircraft.
Walked out to the plane, we're all nervous and edgy. When we get in the plane takes off and relax a little bit more. And they first take off, they go 10 minutes, then they tell you to stand up and everything. Cool, this is real. You're actually gonna jump out of a plane. It's not natural to jump out of a plane.
For me, it was when the door opened, you hear the wind. From one second to the next, it goes from a roar to just absolute silence.
You prepare and you prepare and you prepare. Coming out of the 34-foot tower, you practice your form, you practice your count. When you leap out that aircraft and you got your form and you start counting, that wind snatches you and you're really surprised that you're moving, you end up going sideways before the chute opens. But it's still, when you feel the chute open, it's a good feeling.
Each year, nearly 24,000 soldiers earn the distinguished Silver Airborne Pin. They are infantrymen with wings, ready to wage war from the sky.
When they come here, we just throw discipline in them, and esprit de corps, and morality, and try to revamp their way of thinking and their way of life so they can carry on from here into their outfits and show that out to everybody else. See, I'm airborne, see what I can do. Can you do the same?
You're not a leg no more, you're a paratrooper. Airborne.
Airborne. Thank you, First Sergeant.
First parachutes really operated about the time of the first balloons back in the 18th century, but the modern parachutes operating with airplanes were somewhat primitive when they began. They were stuffed in canisters that were affixed to the airplane. Parachutists wore the harness and leapt from the airplane, and the parachute was opened by a static line. It was many years later before they began using ripcords as we understand them today.
Initially, the only people willing to trust the parachutes were the people who invented them. But the thrill of jumping from planes quickly caught on. By 1918, under General Billy Mitchell, the idea of employing sky soldiers started to take form. But it wasn't until 1940, with the shock of the German airborne forces capturing Belgium's Fort 𝑯𝒊𝒔𝒕𝒆 and the neutralization of Holland, did the United States begin training paratroopers in earnest at Fort Benning, Georgia.
I went into the parachute troops in the early summer of 1942. And back then, the training was extremely rigorous. You ran 5 miles, you did push-ups, you did everything. The first week was more familiarization with how you jumped and so forth and how you packed the parachute. You had to pack your own parachute. Then the second week, you went on some of the towers and jumped and got the posture that you used and so forth in coming out. Then the third week, we went up into the towers at Fort Benning, which were 250 feet high. You first came down with a controlled drop, sitting in a seat. And then you went where they dropped you free and you floated down the 250 feet in a parachute. Then the fourth week was graduation week, and that's when you had to jump from an airplane. I've never seen people so highly motivated as these people were to jump as I was. Every chute was hitched to your backpacker, and you stood up and counted off and so forth, and you checked out the chute of the man in front of you to make sure everything was right. And there was a cable that ran down through the center of the plane, and you hooked up your static line up there, and then they say stand in the door. And then when you got over the drop zone, the pilot would put the green light on, and out you would go when you jump.
We had what we called a static line, which was the thing that opened your chute up after you had gotten a certain distance out of the plane. All of a sudden you get up like that, and it feels like someone has just jerked your chain, and it's really a very exciting experience.
It was from these first soldiers who freely volunteered to become paratroopers that the mystique of the airborne evolved. They had an esprit de corps second to none. Their motto then and now, all the way.
The airborne soldier, he had to be a little bit different. He had to be a completely different breed, or he wouldn't volunteer to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. I will say, of course, that there is a big difference between the airborne infantryman and the regular infantryman. The regular infantrymen, they have quite a bond between them. They served side by side and went through the same kind of hell that we did. But the airborne trooper always seemed to have a little more spirit. He was a little more proud than anybody else.
Airborne assault was first successfully used by the Germans during their blitzkrieg across the Low Countries in the early 1940s. Their assaults were unpredictable, fast, and spectacular.
The Germans were fortunate in their paratroops that they had a brilliant leader, General Karl Student, and that they were also integrated fully into the Army's plans, just as the artillery were or supply was, so that a parachute operation was tactically integrated into their operations and could be carried off with great precision. It was very important to the German early in the war and scored some of the most notable successes.
But the tide turned against the Germans when the overwhelming Allied armies invaded Normandy on June 6, 1944.
We had trained for this for so long and made so many practice jumps getting ready for it that everything we did was mostly automatic.
No operation in military history has ever been so thoroughly thought out as the invasion of German-occupied France. Operation Overlord involved an amphibious attack from the sea and an airborne assault designed to destroy enemy reinforcements.
We were at the airstrip at 𝑯𝒊𝒔𝒕𝒐𝒓𝒄𝒆, England for a week before the jump, and the intelligence section had set up a sand table with the layout of the land where we were supposed to go. The bridges that we were supposed to blow up were all on there. So we went through that as many times as you could possibly go.
The ideal situation for a paratroop force is to land on a bridge or a road network where the enemy is not there in force, and you can set up a defensive perimeter that can subsequently be relieved.
The operation, involving some 13,000 troops from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, was originally set for June 4th, but bad weather conditions kept them in England. For 2 days, airborne troops sat nervously waiting for D-Day. Finally, word came. The invasion was on.
We started packing our equipment and getting ready, and it was really serious then. Into combat, you carry everything that you can possibly find that might help you on the ground. I had my rifle, which was an M1 rifle, the regular infantry rifle. I had the landmine. I had some hand grenades, my water, and a first aid kit. I'm guessing I weighed close to 300 pounds, maybe even more, going into the airplane. I had to be pushed up the steps to get in, and I was willing to go. There was just too much to get up those steps with.
The Douglas C-47 was used to carry paratroopers and to tow glider planes into combat. With a thunderous roar, over 1,000 Allied planes swept over the English Channel.
It was dark. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. As we were going across the channel, we could look out of the airplane and see all of the ships in the channel down there, and it was unbelievable. I don't think anyone had any idea of how many people were involved in this invasion. And as we flew over the coast of Normandy, the flak started coming up from the German anti-aircraft installations. I don't know how to describe the fear. It wasn't complete terror, but I knew that I was in danger, and I was well aware of that, and when I got to the ground, I was going to do everything I could to preserve this body of mine and do what I was supposed to do. On the way down in the jump into Normandy, I checked to make sure my chute was open properly. To guide the parachute, if you wanted to go to the right, you just pulled up on the risers on the right-hand side. The risers are the part that goes from your body up to the parachute. And to go forward, you'd pull the ones in the front. And to go back, you could pull the ones in the back or to the left. The jump wasn't very high, but it seemed forever to get to the ground. And I saw these tracers coming up at me, and they were very close because they went through this gas mask on my side. And I would raise my feet up because I thought they're going to shoot my feet off. I landed in the floodwaters of the river, and I was a little over waist deep. I got out of my parachute, I surprised myself. I was very calm and unbuckled the chute and got it off. We started to go across the road, and the Germans were on the other side of the road, and we had quite a long firefight there with them. And the Germans started dropping mortar shells into this field that we were in. We were there 5 days, and we couldn't cross the road. The Germans were down there with machine guns. Every time we'd move out that direction, they would open up with these machine guns. We were running low on ammunition, so we send people as far as they can go looking for some of our men who had been killed to get the ammunition from them. We knew that the beach troops were getting closer because we could hear the firing coming towards us. I think everybody had the same feeling. It was one of complete frustration because we didn't have the equipment or the number of men that we needed to break through the German lines and get back with our people.
The difficulty that all paratroopers encountered is that once they were on the ground, unless they were linked up rapidly, then they either had to be resupplied, reinforced, or extricated.
I figured, well, that was going to be it. There was no way for us to get out of there. And that was one of the times when I had a real strange feeling. In my hometown, there's a monument on the square in the center of town. And every year on Memorial Day, they put up the names of all of them who were killed in World War I. I could see my name on there as one of the ones from World War II.
For O.B. Hill, the loss of nearly half of the American Airborne Force became a reminder of the reality of war.
The thought that I had then was the wish that this would never happen again.
On February 16, 1945, the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment stormed the Rock, the heavily defended Japanese fortress at Corregidor.
I suppose historic is about as good a word as any to describe what happened that day.
Corregidor is something that came after Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was bad enough, but this was added on to Pearl Harbor, and believe me, it was something that every American wanted to get straightened out. So we were thrilled that we were chosen, and I am absolutely certain we were chosen by MacArthur himself to go in there.
Corregidor is a little island that lies in the mouth of Manila Bay, and as such has historically controlled the entrance to Manila.
We were preparing, and we'd been doing a lot of practicing jump mastering, which is the art of jumping out of the plane at the right time so you'll hit the jump field where you're supposed to hit it. The platoon that I had was the mortar platoon. And our mission really was to support the company with mortar fire. A mortar is a weapon that goes up in the air and it comes straight down. So it's good to fire on gullies on the other side of hills. We carried the mortar plate and the 60-millimeter mortar tubes and the ammunition down. So some of the companies jumped with bundles, but we carried it down. The flying to Corregidor took some time. It's very boring. Those planes, C-47s, you're sitting on the tin seats. It gets a little hard after a while. And it's very noisy in there. And you can speak to one another, but you almost have to shout. So there isn't much you can do. You kind of sit around and smoke. And I'm sure a lot of us were thinking, geez, what's going to happen when we get there?
Led by a vanguard of attack planes, a wave of transports flying in column formation approached the drop zone over Corregidor. At the time of the invasion, only 51 C-47s were available, which meant that only one battalion at a time could be dropped into combat.
It took a long, long time for us to complete our jump using what we call an 8-man stick. And a stick is a term for a group of men that goes out on a single jump on the plane. Normally we jump 12 or even more men out of the plane, but the jump field was so small that we had to keep the number down to no more than 8.
Also, strong winds forced the planes to fly in at only 500 feet, which left little room for error on the part of the jumper.
I went out the door, the bammo, the chute opens, and all of a sudden, I'm on the ground. And I was happy I got down in one piece and unhurt, because a lot of the men did get hurt. Not only was it full of craters and potholes and broken tree stumps, but it was full of these jagged pieces of reinforced concrete laying all over the place. There were many people. It might have been as high as 30% of them missed the jump field, falling short of it because the wind was blowing on the jump field into this gully. I was wounded after the third day on the night of the 19th of February. And that was, and still is, I still can remember it very vividly, one of the most terrifying nights that I've ever spent. The Japanese were sitting out just beyond the bunker, firing into the darkness, and eventually they were hitting someone. I was on the side of the bunker firing. The Navy was sending up star shells, which would drop in the sky. There were magnesium flares. They'd flare out like the light of 1,000 suns. Everything was lit up. It was a hot night. And not only was it black, but it was hot. And one of the flares went off, and I felt like I had some perspiration on my face. And so I reached down and wiped my chin. And I happened to look at my hand, and there was blood on it. I'm sure I was so excited, so keyed up, that I'd been hit. I'd been hit with a grenade, and I didn't even know it. But I felt all right. I was conscious. When I finally calmed down, I really thought only about the business at hand. The slogan those days was "Home alive and 45," and I never really thought I'd get back, but it didn't bother me that much. I said, okay, if I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go. At daybreak, when the thing was finally over, we had 13 men killed. That is a lot of men for a small company. So we hung in there all through the night. The Japanese never really broke through into our area.
We secured the island of 𝑾𝒂𝒑𝒐𝒏𝒔, eliminated the control mines, which would have kept our ships from coming into the harbor, and opened up the harbor of Manila.
It took 2 weeks to finally secure the small island. The losses were horrendous. 455 Americans and over 4,500 Japanese fought to their deaths.
I often think about them and what they missed and how their life was cut short. But sometimes I think, what the hell was I doing running around with a carbine shooting people?
One of the little-known weapons of World War II was the military assault glider. Its mission was to land troops together with their supplies behind enemy lines.
When you talk about the Airborne, everybody thinks of a parachute, paratroopers dropping out of airplanes. They never gave much thought to what this thing called a glider was doing. The object was the gliders could land where airplanes couldn't. And on an invasion, you're dropping a whole regiment or division of paratroopers. A division needs equipment, medics, everything. And that was the job of the gliders.
In early 1941, the U.S. Army began designing gliders for its new program.
The CG-4A, which was the American glider, was made out of steel tubing plywood floorboard that could hold 4,000 pounds and covered with canvas.
They were designed that the nose would swing up, the troops and the equipment would pour out, and then, for all practical purposes, the gliders were abandoned. They might have been salvaged if the ground forces advanced and made it possible to do it, but they're really an expendable item.
The gliders were towed by the C-47. A nylon tow rope was run from the aircraft and hooked to the nose of the glider. The tandem team would be ready for takeoff. The tow plane was the glider's guiding light into combat. They would signal the glider pilot when it was time to release.
The people who flew them, however, were of great daring and great courage, because they were certainly cast into the eye of the battle right at the start.
It was quite a shock to us to see what we were going to fly. But after we got used to flying them, we found out that not only were they ugly ducklings, but they were excellent flying machines. He had to be a good pilot because he didn't have a motor. He had to be able to judge everything from how fast he was dropping to where he was going to land and everything else. His airspeed, his altitude, everything had to be controlled by him. In other words, you're flying to the seat of your pants.
Which is also why they were nicknamed suicide pilots. However, once the glider pilots fulfilled their delivery mission, they became part of the airborne infantry until they were relieved.
When you're a pilot and you're in the aircraft, you're in control. But once you get on the ground and you became part of the airborne, it's a different story altogether. You're taking orders from somebody else. And so it was different. It was quite a change. We realized that's the way it was going to be. And we soon adapted to it.
1943, Sicily. Operation Husky was the scene for the first major Allied glider-borne mission. Unfortunately, the entire operation was in danger of failing.
The courses were complex. The gliders and tow planes were flown by inexperienced people. Of about 130 attacking gliders, 69 of them were cast off too far away from Sicily to make the shore and landed in the sea and drowned. It was a genuine tragedy. About 600 lives were lost.
Following the debacle at Sicily, glider pilots were trained in new landing procedures.
We landed in fields with trees in them, fields with water. We landed under all kinds of obstacle conditions. And that was for the purpose of training for what we were going to get into.
The great use of the gliders was in the invasion of France when they were landed in Normandy, and it was a tremendously daring task for a glider pilot to take a glider into hostile territory and land it on an unprepared field, and the soldiers had to spill out and be prepared to fight. It was a very, very difficult endeavor. The Germans were extremely disrupted by the effect of having the gliders land behind their lines.
As we came into the beach, we were crossing into the land. They started dropping down to the drop altitude, which was 500 feet. Then everything broke loose. First, it was the flak coming up from all directions. All of a sudden, we suddenly realized that we weren't on a training mission anymore, that we were in the real thing. Black smoke, flak bursting all around us. The tow plane was getting bounced all over the sky, and he was getting faster and faster, and we were getting worried all the time. Tracers were coming at us from straight on all directions. You don't expect it until you see it. So by the time we got ready to cut off and land, we were old timers by that time, because we had gone through what you might say one hellacious landing.
In Normandy, the glider pilots had to contend with large fields planted with anti-glider poles. The stakes would impale the flimsy gliders as they landed.
They figured Normandy was a successful operation, even though our losses were quite heavy. They weren't as bad as they had expected. After Normandy, though, all the other missions were just another job of work.
One of the most disastrous airborne yet successful glider-borne assaults was Operation Market Garden. 1,900 gliders landed only 1,200 soldiers, but delivered over 800 jeeps and nearly 16 tons of cargo to the battlefield.
Holland was a mission that we were destined for that turned out bad as far as the overall operation was concerned, but as far as the Airborne's operations, our part of it was quite successful. We ran into dense cloud cover over the channel. A lot of the gliders boarded that mission because of that dense fog, but we managed to keep going.
During World War II, about 5,000 glider pilots were trained and sent into combat with only a wing and a prayer. They flew just 8 missions, yet almost 30% would never return.
We always said we were the only pilots in the Air Force that always had to walk back. And it's the truth.
On June 25, 1950, North Korean military leaders unleashed their army across the 38th parallel to capture Seoul. President Truman quickly responded by deploying U.S. troops to halt the communist invasion.
The terrain in Korea did not lend itself readily to the employment of parachutes, particularly in the mid part of the war when there were a lot of fighting in the mountainous areas. But they were used significantly on 2 occasions. In 1950, they were dropped near Pyongyang, in what was then the capital of North Korea. The paratroopers were brought in by 80 C-47s and 160 C-119s. The C-119 was a development of the Fairchild C-82. It was a twin-boomed cargo plane, the first designed specifically to drop paratroopers. It had a big aft cargo door area where the paratroopers could very quickly deploy and didn't have to go out the side of the aircraft and risk running into the stabilizer as they did on conventional transports.
At 2 o'clock on October 20th, paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team filled the skies over the enemy lines of North Korea.
It was a very successful drop that was properly relieved and carried out fully the idea of a vertical envelopment. And they seized the crossroads and met and defeated a regiment in battle. After the Chinese had come down the peninsula again and we had rolled them back, there was a second drop just outside of Seoul at Daegu Airport, and it was similarly successful.
Also during the Korean War, it was the first time in airborne operations when large quantities of heavy support equipment were parachuted into combat. During the Second World War was a small group of soldiers and aviators who fought the Japanese throughout Southeast Asia. Operating out of Burma, the first air commandos unknowingly set the stage for airborne operations of the future with their newfangled flying machine, the helicopter.
The advent of the helicopter brought some great advantages when paratroopers have to worry about weather, about winds, about assembly, and so forth. With a helicopter assault, you can deposit the troops on a specific point on the ground. They're on the ground in a cohesive unit, and also your resupply is much easier. You can reinforce the same way that you brought the original troops in.
The use of helicopters now enabled an infantry division to become air mobile as opposed to airborne. The helicopter could rapidly deploy on short-range maneuvers into enemy territory, giving new meaning to vertical envelopment. This new technology led to the birth of the first air cavalry in 1965.
In Vietnam, the paratroops were employed, but it was difficult because once they were dropped on a jungle area, it was difficult for them to get it together. It was difficult to re-employ them, and they in effect became simply foot troops on the ground inside what could be enemy territory if the Vietnamese forces were there. The concept of the mobile forces was greatly enhanced by arming the helicopters with recoilless weapons. So you not only had troops brought in, but you had mobile artillery support on the spot. It became a very, very effective combination for use in such a war.
The most common helicopter used during the war was the troop-carrying Bell UH-1 medium-load carrier, the Huey. the thumping beat of its twin-bladed rotor quickly became a familiar sound over the primitive jungles of Vietnam. For troop support, the Huey was teamed with the twin-rotored CH-47 Chinook. The Chinook's heavy lift capability proved invaluable in jungle warfare. Its external carrying ability required only a small clearing for loading and unloading. The esprit of the air mobile teams in Vietnam was tremendous, certainly a vital factor that contributed to its early success. Within a few years of its birth, air mobile operations became substantially more daring and complex.
Ultimately, it was such a strange war in that there was no fixed lines, that the enemy was fighting within the Allied territory, that you couldn't always tell the friendlies from the unfriendlies, that the ability to put troops on the ground in a specific area and secure a specific area for a period of time was about the most effective method of fighting the war we had. We could not secure the whole area. There were not sufficient troops to do it. So you could secure on demand a certain area by the presence of the air mobile forces. After Vietnam, there was much assessment of what was done, what could have been done better, and there gradually grew what is come to be termed the air-land battle, in which the units of the Air Force and the Army and the Navy are integrated so that all of the assaults that are made are orchestrated to optimize them.
The use of combined forces was effectively employed during Operation Urgent Fury in the fall of 1983, when President Reagan ordered a combat assault on the idyllic Caribbean island of Grenada. The mission was to suppress the hostile regime and rescue and evacuate American citizens. In the early hours of October 25th, Airborne qualified Air Force combat controllers, along with Army Rangers, were rushed to clear and secure the island's airfield, while AC-130 gunships and helicopters provided air support.
Initial airborne assault into here by the 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion was about 7:15 in the morning. There was some live fire. The aircraft themselves were receiving anti-aircraft gunfire, and we jumped in at 500 feet. 2nd Ranger Battalion jumped in with no reserves, counting only on a T-10 to employ, and we hit the airfield, moved up into the ground surrounding that area, and started sweeping over this area where the enemies were firing back at us from.
With the airfield secured, C-141 Starlifters quickly landed, bringing in the 82nd Airborne Division to relieve the Rangers and press the attack into the surrounding area. Since 1965, the Starlifter has been the workhorse of military airlift. The C-141 can lift nearly 200 troops into battle, or 35 tons of supplies. Within the week, peace was restored to the island. Nearly 1,200 refugees, along with 595 American students, were evacuated to safety.
We conducted an air mobile assault and rescued 233 Americans, which were on the far side of the island.
Six years later, combined forces would be called again. This time, it was to apprehend the dictator of Panama. On December 19, 1989, U.S. military troops were sent under the cover of night to swiftly capture General Manuel Noriega, defend American interests, and protect the Panama Canal.
In the attack on Panama, the key thing was the essential timing so that all the paratroopers made their attacks at very disparate points around the country, almost simultaneously, so that the Panama Defense Forces didn't have a chance to rally and to understand what was happening and to mount a cohesive defense.
At 1:55 a.m., elements of the 82nd Airborne Division parachuted into the Tocumen Torrijos Airport just east of Panama City. In a coordinated effort, U.S. forces already based in Panama began attacking throughout the country. By dawn, Operation Just Cause had crushed the Panamanian Defense Forces.
They were accompanied by AC-130 Spectre gunships that were ready, and when they made their drop at 500 feet, seized the key positions on the airport, seized Noriega's beach home, which was located nearby, and within a few hours had secured the whole area. It was a perfectly executed vertical envelopment by paratroops, a night drop, and extremely well done.
But Noriega had eluded capture. On January 3rd, after seeking refuge for 10 days at the Vatican Embassy, Noriega finally surrendered to U.S. authorities. Soon again, airborne troops would be deployed, but this time in numbers unseen since World War II. On August 2nd, 1991, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded the neighboring country of Kuwait, threatening to occupy Saudi Arabia as well. After 6 months of tense waiting and unheeded warnings for Hussein to get out of Kuwait, President Bush unleashed Operation Desert Storm. The combined air and ground campaign would become the largest offensive since the invasion of Normandy. The 101st Airborne Division mounted a large-scale air assault via helicopters into the northwest area of the Iraqi defense perimeter. Never before had so many troops been moved by helicopter so deep behind enemy lines. Coalition forces relentlessly pounded the Iraqi army for over 100 hours. By February 28th, Kuwait was liberated, and Desert Storm was declared a victory.
The future of paratroopers and assault troops in general is quite bright, simply because the nature of warfare is changing. Wars that will be coming in the future won't be against superpowers, but instead in third world countries in conditions of low intensity, when airborne assault forces may be the only practical way to intervene.
I think that the airborne is the elite of the Army. I personally do.
You can hear our battle cry as we float down through the sky. I'm proud to be allowed to be one of the proud of the parachute infantry. Hey!
Whether the airborne soldier lands by parachute or helicopter or transport plane, tomorrow's airborne warrior will pass over the most complex of battlefields. Even in this technological age, the silent descent of thousands of paratroopers is still an invaluable asset to military planners. Paratroopers always bring to combat one of the most critical elements of victory: surprise.